Hey everyone, welcome to Mythology Explained. In today's video, we're going to discuss Rasputin. Certainly a historical personage, not a figment of mythology, but his life was so strange and sordid that he has become something of a modern mythological figure, especially as a perennial feature of popular culture through a tide of books written and movies made after his death. He rose from humble beginnings, a lowly illiterate peasant in a remote backwater of Siberia, to become one of the most powerful people in all of Russia, wielding incredible influence over the royal family. He became a man of God, allowing him to garner prominence through ecclesiastical channels, and in this capacity appeared to have magical healing abilities, using prayer to heal the tsar's son, a hemophiliac, on numerous occasions, many of these proving miraculous recoveries that baffled royal physicians. One of these times was in 1908, after being summoned to the royal palace to help with one of Alexei's episodes. Rasputin managed to lessen the boy's pain, perhaps through hypnosis. However, the most remarkable detail of this visit occurred while he was leaving the palace. He prophesied that the fate of the Romanov dynasty was inextricably linked to him, and in large part, his words that night truly did come true, for only a short time after his death, a mere few months, the autocracy of Russia was undone, overwhelmed and overthrown by revolution, a paradigm shift punctuated by Nicholas II's abdication on March 15, 1917. And the circumstances of his death, his seeming imperviousness to poison, as well as his reported resiliency to gunshot wounds more than anything else, made him a person of interest, his durability linking him with dark powers and the supernatural. Let's get into it. Born a peasant in a small village in the Russian Empire on January 21, 1869, little is known of Rasputin's early years. Despite that, though, you could say the strangeness and near supernaturality of his life began with his birth, for of the 8 confirmed children born to his parents, he was the only one to not die in infancy or early childhood. Potentially, there was a 9th child, a second surviving child, Theodosia. He was godfather to her children, but beyond their closeness being chronicled, no records that connects them as brother and sister exists. Generally, historians agree that, by dint of him being a Siberian peasant, growing up in remote rurality, Rasputin was almost certainly illiterate, a deficiency passed down from his mother and father, one allowed to crystallize in a place without, or at the most very little, opportunity for formal education. With the local archival records to rely on, it can be seen that Rasputin's formative years were characterized by delinquent and rambunctious behavior, including drunkenness, minor theft, and a general disdain for local law enforcement. Later, more serious crimes, such as blasphemy, horse theft, and the dissemination of virulent lies, were leveled against him, as was the case with his potential 9th sibling, Theodosia. There is no substantive evidence to corroborate and legitimate these accusations, a pattern that persists throughout his life. In 1886, not yet 18 years old, Rasputin left his home, leaving Tyumen behind and traveling roughly 250 kilometers northeast to Abelak. Here, he met and courted a peasant girl named Praskovia. They married in 1887 and had 7 children together, but unfortunately, like its parents before him, the harsh realities of that time claimed many of them early in life. 3 survived: Dmitri, born in 1895, Maria, born in 1898, and Varvara, born in 1900. In 1897, Rasputin, now 28 years old and married for about a decade, was stricken with renewed zeal for God and religion. What gave rise to this sudden development isn't known for certain, but much speculation surrounds it, ranging from evading punishment incurred for horse theft to being a spiritual conduit bestowed with the vision of either Saint Simeon of Verkuturi or of the Virgin Mary. The impetus notwithstanding, Rasputin left his old life behind, a move, according to experts, that only could have been precipitated by crisis, likely emotional, spiritual, or involving self-preservation. After many shorter pilgrimages, Rasputin traveled to St. Nicholas Monastery, a transformational experience for him. Greatly impressed by Macquarie, one of the monastery elders, Rasputin's visit lengthened to a stay lasting several months. Some scholars guess that it was then he first learned to read and write, though some believe he remained illiterate his whole life. As time went on, the asceticism of the monastery began to chafe him, as well as the homosexuality of many of the monks. This comes as no great surprise, for he was a proponent of holy passionlessness, a state of emptiness that enabled closeness to God that could best be achieved through sexual exhaustion and extended periods of debauchery. He made his way back to Pokrovskoye, where his family was. Pokrovskoye. Apparently, the man who returned was radically different from the one who left. He was abstemious, indulging in neither meat nor alcohol, and his periods of prayer were more frequent. In the years that followed, Rasputin became a stranic, a holy wanderer. Visiting religious sites around the country, he would leave his family for months or even years between journeys, by some accounts traveling as far as Jerusalem and Mount Athos in Greece, sustaining himself on the generosity of peasants. Gradually, he attracted a small group of followers, composed of family members and other local peasants. They held secret meetings, and these were a source of suspicion and anger for the village priest and many of the other peasants. As such, regarding their activities, many rumors of sacrilege and debauchery began to circulate. It was said female followers washed him before each meeting, that the group could be heard singing strange songs, and that sexual orgies and forms of self-harm and debasement through actions like whipping and beating were common practice. Again, though, there doesn't seem to be any concrete evidence here, only speculation. Words of Rasputin spread, him gaining a reputation as a charismatic holy man with healing powers. He came to the city of Kazan, where his esteem grew substantially. People came to him with their troubles, and despite talk that he used his position to bed many of his female followers, influential people of high standing took notice, as was the case with the Father Superior of the Seven Lakes Monastery, a monastery located just outside of Kazan. With Andrei, a superior abbot, and with Bishop Christanos, this last providing Rasputin with a letter recommending him to Bishop Sergei and preparing arrangements for him to travel to St. Petersburg. Upon his arrival, prominent religious leaders were impressed by him, so much so, in the case of Archimandrite Theophan, that he invited Rasputin to stay with him at his home. Through these connections, Rasputin rose to prominence, introduced to more and more prestigious circles. Through Theophan, Rasputin gained access to high society salons, soirees where the aristocracy would convene to discuss religion. These salons were how Rasputin attracted his first influential adherents outside of the church. Working in his favor was serendipity, for as chance would have it, the emergence of alternative religious developments, such as theosophy and spiritualism, were novel and of great intrigue to the aristocracy, who had become enthralled with the occult. Rasputin's air and appearance, his unorthodox ideas and unconventional mannerisms, evoked notions of mysticism and the supernatural, no doubt resonating with the occult zeitgeist that pervaded the aristocracy at that time, allowing him to curry favor and cultivate power with greater ease. Rasputin continued to make acquaintance with people of higher and higher standing until, on November 1st, 1905, Rasputin met the Tsar for the first time at Peterhof Palace, a meeting recorded by the Tsar in his diary. With this meeting as a foundation, Rasputin gradually ingratiated himself into the royal family, over this time, falling under his spell, coming to believe that he was endowed with magical abilities, that he, and only he, could heal their son, Alexei. It should be noted that the timeline and the details of this development are debated by scholars. At this point, even if Rasputin were to have suddenly died, his life still would have been mysterious and mystifying. What with all of the accusation raised against him, stealing horses, bedding female followers, religious orgies and the like, as well as his meteoric rise from illiterate peasant boy in a backwater with no ties to further his advancement, to an influential man of religion, deftly navigating aristocratic circles so that he climbed the social ladder and became associated with the royal family. But of course, the truly bewildering and enigmatic events of Rasputin's life, the events that would, ultimately, mythologize his life, especially as crystallized in popular culture, were yet to come. Rasputin's hold of the royal family was predicated on his perceived ability to heal Alexei, who became the linchpin, really, of all the events surrounding Rasputin, in the last chapter of his life particularly, as they pertain to his success in amassing power. Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, had 4 daughters. His 5th child was a son, Alexei. But Alexei wasn't in good health, unfortunately. He suffered from hemophilia, a hereditary disease that prevents blood from clotting properly, meaning when an injury is suffered, the body doesn't stop bleeding. As well, people with hemophilia bruise easily and are more likely to be afflicted by bleeding in their joints and brain. Alexandra, the Tsarina of Russia, was particularly impressed by Rasputin, convinced he could ameliorate her son's condition by alleviating pain and stopping bleeding through the power of religious healing. This afforded Rasputin great influence and made him a mainstay in the royal entourage. In the spring of 1907, he was summoned to pray for Alexei after the prince became afflicted by internal bleeding. The next morning, the situation was much less dire, with the prince seemingly recovered. And similarly, in the summer of 1912, a hemorrhage in Alexei's groin and thigh after being bounced around by a bumpy carriage ride resulted in a very large hematoma, which inflicted excruciating pain and burned the prince up in a delirious fever. At this time, Rasputin was in Siberia, far, far away, but a telegram was sent, and he promptly replied, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him much." And in 2 days' time, Alexei recovered, apparently a recovery so miraculous that even the attending physicians conceded that it was, medically speaking, inexplicable. In fact, the relationship between Rasputin and the health of Alexei was so uncanny that Dr. Fedorov remarked that Alexandra was blameless for putting her faith in Rasputin, saying, "Rasputin would come in, walk up to the patient, look at him, and spit. The bleeding would stop in no time. How could the Empress not trust Rasputin after that?" With his position as a savior of the royal son secure, Rasputin gained considerable power and status at court. By the Tsar, he was made lampadnik, lamplighter, a prestigious position, the duties of which were to light the lamps in front of the religious icons in the royal palace, effectively bestowing unfettered access to the royal family upon him. As was the case in his childhood village and the village where he met his wife and started his own family, controversy soon swirled around Rasputin, following him like a miasma. A proliferation of accusations, most of them heresy or unwanted intimate encounters, were directed at him, the most egregious of which were abusing his position to manipulate the Tsar, thus threatening the monarchy itself, as well as the rumors of him exerting his influence over the Tsarina, exploiting the love she had for her son to force her into a carnal relationship. Religious and political leaders, even relations of the royal family, became enemies of Rasputin, the stories of his impertinence, lechery, and undue influence becoming common knowledge, largely as a result of brazen behavior, abusing people of the highest standing. Peter Stolypin, the Prime Minister of Russia, confronted the Tsar, but this direct move failed to have Rasputin exiled, let alone his powers curtailed or his appetites lessened. In March 1910, rumors were widely reported in the media that Rasputin maintained a grossly inappropriate relationship with many members of the royal family, particularly the Tsar's teenage daughters. The first assassination attempt against Rasputin came in the year 1914, when a 33-year-old peasant woman stabbed him in his stomach just out front of his home. Though seriously injured, for a time walking the razor-thin line between life and death, Rasputin survived after undergoing surgery and spending a lengthy stay recovering in hospital. Later, a coalition formed by certain members of the nobility, like Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich and Prince Felix Yusupov, and certain high-ranking political figures like Vladimir Purishkevich, decided that Rasputin had to be eliminated, his influence over the royal family, particularly Tsarina Alexandra, jeopardizing the whole of Russia. By 1915, World War I was well underway, and it was in this year that the Tsar took personal command of the Russian army, leaving Alexandra to run the country, Rasputin functioning as her personal advisor. With the Tsar occupied, and with the incredible influence he exerted over Alexandra, Rasputin's powers were vast, both in religious and secular affairs, dictating the appointments of both church officials and cabinet ministers. He even tried his hand in the military on occasion, invariably to the great detriment of the Russian forces. On a late December night in 1916, he was lured to Yusupov's Moika Palace, and as to what happened next, there are two accounts. What is known empirically from the autopsy of Rasputin's corpse, and, second, the events of Rasputin's death as recounted by Yusupov in his memoirs. Rasputin was shot 3 times, one of those point blank in the head, but beyond that, the details are murky. By contrast, the account put to pen by Yusupov is much more elaborate. According to him, the tea and cakes Rasputin ate were poisoned, as were the 3 glasses of wine he drank. However, despite consuming a quantity of cyanide sufficient to kill a person many times over, Rasputin appeared unaffected. Dismayed, Yusupov excused himself and went upstairs, grabbed a revolver, returned downstairs, told Rasputin to say a prayer, and shot him. This was followed by several actions taken to avoid culpability, like one of the conspirators dressing up as Rasputin and returning to Rasputin's home, endeavoring to obfuscate what transpired by creating a false trail. Apparently, when Yusupov returned to his basement to verify that Rasputin was indeed dead, Rasputin suddenly came to life and attacked him. Yusupov fled upstairs, pursued by Rasputin, who was then shot again in the palace's courtyard. The conspirators wrapped Rasputin's corpse in cloth, drove to the Petrovsky Bridge, and dropped it in the icy waters below. The senior autopsy surgeon, while his report was lost, stated that Rasputin's body was severely traumatized by several acute injuries, including 3 gunshot wounds, a laceration on his left side, and a mangled multitude of others, many of them believed to have happened after death. Sources claim no water was found in Rasputin's lungs, which would indicate he died before his body was dumped into the river, not having drowned. Additionally, many grisly details, though unfounded, were spread about. One of them was that Rasputin's penis was removed. However, by the autopsy surgeon's own account, the genitals were found intact. Despite everything, a small funerary service was held for Rasputin. The royal family and a small group close to them were in attendance. Reportedly, it was the intention of the royal family to have a church built over his grave, but this wish never came to pass. Rasputin's body was dug up and burned after the Tsar abdicated the throne in March 1917. Supposedly, the reason for this was to preempt any possibility of Rasputin's grave becoming a rallying point where supporters of the old regime could gather and galvanize. Perhaps the strangest aspect of Rasputin's whole life was his prophetic words more or less coming true. Years earlier, he predicted the fate of the royal family was linked with his own, and just a few months after his death, the Romanov dynasty that had ruled for 300 years came to an end, washed away by the bursting dam of revolution. Since his death, Rasputin has been made use of again and again in popular culture, appearing in a profusion of films, television series, theatrical productions, comics, books, songs, video games, and other media, such as being made into an action figure and being the theme for a figure skating performance. In recent decades, he was the antagonist in the animated movie Anastasia, which was released in 1997. In this movie, he's portrayed as something along the lines of a dark sorcerer, warlock, and necromancer, wielding devilish power, bending all of it to destroy the Romanovs. And very much in the same vein is his portrayal in the live-action Hellboy movie released in 2004, a movie centered on the eponymous hero who first entered the consciousness of popular culture via comic book in August of 1993. In the movie, Rasputin serves the Ogdru Jahad, the 7 gods of chaos, though he was the one-time occult advisor to the Romanovs. His infamous death on that late December night is described as a result of suffering virtually every sort of attack: poisoned, shot, stabbed, clubbed, castrated, and finally drowned. In this movie, because he worked for the Nazis during World War II, he must have somehow survived this gauntlet, or have been resurrected by some netherworld or other extra-dimensional force. And that's it for this video. If you enjoy the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel.